I don't even know where to begin with this section of the video, or any part of talking about Mario Sunshine for that matter. I've been sitting here looking at a blank Google Doc for the past 30 minutes or so and thinking about what to do, but I figured if I wanted to get started, I should just write and not think about pre-planning or anything like that. And just me saying that should already give you a great perspective into my overall thoughts on Mario Sunshine as a whole. It baffled me so much that I'm practically at a loss for words while writing this, yet still managing to jot something down. I have about 4,000 or so words worth of notes scattered across my digital notepad, writing things down as I played the game, and I guess I could simply read them out to you and that would make enough content for a video on its own, but what's stopping me is the lack of structure in those notes. My thoughts were scattered, my emotions were raw. Super Mario Sunshine was one of the first games I ever played as a kid. Luigi's Mansion, Sonic Heroes, The Simpsons Hit and Run, Mario Kart Double Dash, and Super Mario Sunshine were my trifecta of games growing up, as they were the first bundle of games I remember playing. And to be fair, I loved each and every one of those games growing up. When I say I found it hard to stop playing Mario Sunshine as a kid, I really do mean that. I never beat it though. I always remember getting pretty far in the game, but what stopped me were the completion requirements. I had no idea on what was actually required to beat the game, and I always got stuck on episode 3 of Serena Beach. That level required you to go around the hotel to find a pineapple to feed to Yoshi so you could clean up the booze in the vents to grab the shine. I had absolutely no clue on what to do and where to go, so Mario Sunshine would go uncompleted for many years. That is, until 2020 when Nintendo released Super Mario 3D All-Stars for a very limited time. I remember finishing Sunshine for the very first time, and I still have that save file on my Switch, but I don't really remember anything about that playthrough. There wasn't really anything in that original playthrough that stood out enough for me to remember going back into it today. When starting Mario-thon, I knew I would have to beat this game again eventually, and I was kind of hesitant to do so because I was planning on 100%ing all of the 3D Mario games at the very least, and, through word of mouth, I heard I wasn't going to have a very good time. Well, I completed the game, and did I have a bad time? I'm not really sure. There's going to be a lot of negativity in this section of the video, and let me get this out of the way. Mario Sunshine has its moments, that I am 100% sure of. By the time I was done with the game, I was just kind of bewildered and left confused on how to feel. This may be the most mixed I felt on any game, period. About 3-ish hours into my run, the game actually started to grow on me, only to go into major frustration and confusion. I wish to apologize in advance if this video gets messy. I'm probably going to trip over my words a lot, and I'm fully expecting to at least contradict myself a few times. By the time I'm done talking about Mario Sunshine, this video may no longer make sense, but hey, neither does Mario Sunshine. For context, playing this game for Mario-thon, I just wanted to play the game and be done. But a friend of mine brought up the idea of playing the game to completion, which was something I had never done before. Reluctantly, I accepted, mostly because I had the extra time on my hands and I prefer having the full game recorded onto my hard drive if I needed any specific footage for later. Mario Sunshine is a surprisingly inaccessible game, and it took me a minute to realize that. The way I was playing it was through Super Mario 3D All-Stars. This collection was released in September of 2020 and was being sold for a limited time by Nintendo as part of Mario's frankly pitiful 35th anniversary, and I kind of forgot that the game isn't being sold or printed anymore, which felt weird to me as I've owned this game ever since it came out and have been able to play it wherever, but a lot of the Switch users out there won't be able to play this game, and honestly, thank God, because this is probably the worst possible way you can play Mario Sunshine. For starters, this is technically the most accessible version of the game, even though it's not widely available anymore, and honestly, you might as well just buy a GameCube with the original game for how much they're asking for 3D All-Stars. Or, emulate it. In all honesty, there is a lot wrong with this collection. So much wrong that it could make its own video, but I'm not gonna do that because I don't feel like being miserable. I don't know if this is just me, but the upscaling looks abysmal. There's always this heat wave effect going on in the background, which gets very disorienting as nothing is standing still, and it makes the game look like Nintendo used AI to upscale the textures. You son of a bitch. Inexcusable. Absolutely inexcusable. They should have just remade the cutscenes at this point because the AI upscaling looks unbelievably awful. There is absolutely no redeeming qualities to this. It kind of ruined the story for me because I couldn't get myself invested in anything that was going on. Okay, it's not like we ever go to a Mario game for the story, but you can tell there was an attempt made here. This is still the only 3D Mario game to have full voice acting and a plot that develops as you play the game. Usually it's just Peach is captured at the beginning of the game. game, and nothing really happens until you rescue her. But there are actual things that develop throughout the story. Well, one thing, anyway. The story is goofy enough in a decent way. Mario gets framed through graffiti plastered throughout the Delfino Isles and gets sent to prison with a very unfair trial. 24 years later, and his brother Luigi would follow him. I don't know. I find it kind of charming and funny that Mario's super nonchalant about the whole thing. He doesn't even get to defend himself. He just gets thrown in jail, and instead of trying to break out, he's like, you know what? I'm okay with this, and is sent to clean up the mess he totally made, which eventually leads to a confrontation with Shadow Mario in Peanut Park, who was actually revealed to be Bowser Jr., and I don't know if this was just me letting the insanity seep in or what, but I burst out laughing when Jr. was on top of the robot explaining his grand evil plan. After that, Peach actually does get kidnapped, and then nothing happens for the rest of the game. Props to Nintendo, I guess, for attempting to replicate the aura that Sonic Adventure 2 had, but it just doesn't work. You can't just add Mario to Shadow's name and think we wouldn't see through your lies, Shigeru Miyamoto. Man, I'm on to you. You're on strike too. It's a goofy story, and I kinda like it. 3D All-Stars still butchered the hell out of those cutscenes, though. Yeah, don't think I forgot about you, Mr. 3D All-Stars. I'm not done with you yet because we haven't touched all of the bases with your ever-so-lovely Port of Sunshine. 3D All-Stars is probably just the most outright lazy thing Nintendo has done for any other franchises in recent memory. Not a bad thing, just lazy. For starters, and what is arguably one of the things that makes me the most angry, is that Sunshine is fully emulated, and it infuriates me that it's okay for Nintendo to emulate their games and repackage them for $60, but will go ahead and nuke a site like Vimslayer who are actually preserving the original titles. Even then, the emulation just isn't good at all. Outside of the cutscenes being AI upscaled, which we talked about earlier, the frame rate is the exact same as the GameCube, which is pretty easy to notice that it's not 60 frames per second. With dips, by the way. Originally, I thought it was the way that I was looking at the game through my capture card, but no, it's just an ever-loving, inexcusable 30 frames per second with dips. I've stated before on this channel that I'm not much of a stickler when it comes to performance in a game. I can handle 30 FPS on a lot of games just fine, but if you're porting a 20-plus-year-old game to a system with much more powerful hardware, there is absolutely no excuse to bump the frame rate as high as you can. To not bump the frame rate as high as you can, that's what I meant. I tripped over. See, I mentioned I was going to trip over my words. I got you. If Mario Odyssey can run at 60 frames, why can't Sunshine? God knows the game isn't that powerful. Another thing is, the controls are completely screwed up to the point where it hardly feels like the same game. Nintendo hates accessibility with a passion, so I would expect nothing less from them, but I can't tell you how many times I've screwed up pointing FLUDD in a certain direction because the aiming controls are completely inverted and there's no way to change them. Not to mention there's no analog triggers, so moves from the original game just don't carry over here. If you want to aim with FLUDD, I gotta stop whatever I may be doing to stand in place and shoot whatever area I'm gonna shoot at. The worst of all isn't even aiming, surprisingly. No, it's the fact that there's a very short delay in the controls themselves. It's so small to the point you would hardly notice it until you start missing a few jumps you know you should have made, falling off ledges and such, even though I know I pressed A to jump, and you just get the feeling that something is very, very wrong. It's really unfortunate that this did hinder a lot of my Mario Sunshine experience, considering that it's not necessarily the game's fault that it is that way, especially considering that I haven't spoken a single word about anything the actual game has to offer yet outside of the cutscenes and the port itself, so let's actually talk about the game. I've said it before, and I'm definitely going to say it in however many of these sections I please, but going from one Mario game to the next, you really start to see where certain Mario ideas got their start, and where a lot of good ideas simply got thrown out for no reason. Word of caution, if you're going into this game expecting a sequel to Mario 64 like I was, you're going to be sorely mistaken and thrown off by how much of this game seems to go against what Mario 64 was and its design philosophies. Let me explain. The early 2000s were a different time for Nintendo. You may think they were all bubbly, family-friendly fun for all of eternity, and for the most part, yeah, you would be right. Although in the 2000s, Nintendo's marketing strategy shifted a decent amount. It was almost as if they were afraid of being seen as a company for kids, and their marketing strategy reflected that. All I have to do to prove this is show you an official Mario render having a tattoo, and I think you'll understand. This way of trying new things also bled into their game. People adored the more mature Zelda showcase at Space World, and with the criticism of the Wind Waker at the time, it led to the creation of Twilight Princess, which is the most gritty, dark, and most realistic Zelda to date, where Link is a man. Mario gets framed and put on trial. I've already spoken about the story and how hit or miss it can be, so I'm not going to bore you again with all the details, but the cutscenes and overall story of the game are really the first impressions you get of Mario Sunshine. You're on a plane, you land, Mario's put on trial, yada yada yada. This is when it was clear to me that this was not going to be a sequel to Mario 64 in any sense. Kudos for doing something different with Mario, but there's a reason Mario games have had very little and static narratives both before and after Sunshine. Not only is the story kind of a bad omen for things to come, but it also let me know that the game was very linear. Which, to each their own, I guess, but I really don't like this decision at all. It took me around 15 minutes to get into the first real stage in Bianco Hills just to be restricted on what I can or cannot do. There's some freedom in what you can do and what areas you tackle and when, but at the end of the day, the way in which you beat the game is the same every time. All roads lead to the same destination. You get launched into an open sandbox level and you have to tackle the first 7 missions in every level before you can beat the game. And I don't think it's the linearity alone that kills it for me. It's more so a death by 1,000 paper cuts. A bunch of much smaller decisions that lead into this game being so repetitive and frankly boring. You launch into Bianco Hills, what do? You fight a boss, of course. What's next? You have a level where FLUDD is taken away from you and you have to go through a traditional obstacle course. Red coin somewhere in the level, fight the boss again but with extra steps, another obstacle course, and an actually unique level. What I just described is pretty much what all Mario Sunshine is and what makes up the vast majority of mandatory shines in the game. It's nearly the same no matter where you go, and it boggles my mind that this passed the quality check. The thing is, I don't really mind going through each level in a certain order when it's done right. Super Mario Sunshine does not do linearity right. Mario Galaxy is really the first game where the linearity is tackled with a semblance of grace, and that's mostly attributed to the fact that the game had a proper development time behind it. Those levels were designed to be linear, but in Sunshine, it feels like they wanted to go in the sandbox direction as, you know, the kind of structure they wanted for the game, but got cold feet midway through development. You aren't able to complete any shine in any order. This, in my opinion, ruins a lot of what makes these open levels so special, and it makes me realize that there's hardly a use for levels this big when you aren't encouraged to explore them and discover new things. You don't even get to find out what the secrets to these levels are because the game just shows you the locations of these areas off rip, which is honestly kind of a good thing because I think one of the few flaws in Mario 64's design is that not enough is shown to you through some stars. So, you know, something like this, I'm relatively 50-50 on. I do think it leans towards a positive at the end of the day, since there were a few stars on Mario 64 that had very similar wording to their names, where the mission just didn't tell you where you're supposed to go, and without a guide, it was pretty difficult to find. And this may sound weird, but I think the repetition of the game is also a plus if you squint and tilt your head to the side. I kind of over-exaggerate how many things were copied and pasted onto the other levels. It's true that mission ideas are copied, but the way in which you achieve said goals can be relatively different. Getting to the quote-unquote secret stages require different things out of the player to get into, and those levels by themselves are relatively fun if anything else. There was a certain point in my playthrough where I actually got used to the controls and was able to platform well and hit some fun tricks, but man was it hard to get used to. I absolutely adore how Mario 64 controls. I don't know what kind of diet Mario was on between 64 and Sunshine, but all of his weight is just gone, stripped from his body. I mean, look at this guy. He looks like he's got some weight to him, and it was nearly perfect minus the half circle nonsense. Well, on the bright side, they took out the half circle. In return, Mario controls like you're flinging around a Gmod ragdoll. For everything that's done correctly in this game, I almost feel like Nintendo threw in some extra nonsense to go with it because I feel like Mario's movement could have been great in this game, but I have to use FLUDD all the time just to make sure I don't dive off some random cliff and pass away. Take away FLUDD and Mario's simply a weightless mess. He's far too easy to just fling him in one direction or the other and you just completely lose your balance and Mario goes too far and you pass away again. Not to mention they took away his long jump. Why? Well, that's something only Miyamoto and Jesus H. Christ knows, but it still pisses me off thinking about it. Plain and simple, Mario doesn't feel the most fun to control without some major asterisks. Yeah, sure, I got used to him and was able to do some cool things with the movement. I won't lie, it got fun at points, flinging myself around. It made me feel like a speedrunner at times, but getting adjusted to a mediocre mechanic and performing well at it doesn't make the mechanic good all of a sudden. You're more than allowed to enjoy it, sure, I enjoyed it at times, but it's the same problem as, say, Sonic Dylonic Unleashed, where precise platforming is an absolute nightmare at times, especially when you can hardly correct yourself without overshooting. Now again, I will say it has its moments. The controls are not all bad. I really enjoy Flood being used for both a combat and a platforming option. I wish certain aspects of him were used more like the turbo nozzle and the rocket, but being able to correct yourself in the way that you can with Flood helps out a lot, so it does sting when he gets taken away by that prick Junior. You could see in my early gameplay that I was fumbling a lot of my movements strictly because I hadn't fully understood how platforming worked in this game, because I'm so used to Mario 64, so moving to Sunshine feels like a cold splash in the face after being hung over. It's very shocking. Now, I know I've talked about the actual mission objectives enough. You know, they're repetitive and whatnot, but what about the actual level design itself? And in all honesty, I enjoy it a lot. Just looking at the surface, I really like Delfino Plaza as a location and everything surrounding it. Being 100% with y'all, I don't really care about world building or story in my mainline Mario games, but credit where it's due, this game really is just a skip and a hop away from being open world, and I think that's really cool. Due to the location of the game, the developers just couldn't make any level they wanted it to be, so desert and snow levels are out of the question. They had to get creative with the level themes, and I think they did a really good job. The vibes are immaculate, and it's honestly one of the best Mario games when it comes to setting, in my opinion. Of course, you have your traditional beach levels and whatnot, but we're able to see other themes we don't often see in Mario. Rico Harbor, Serena Beach, and Noki Bay are my favorite levels from a visual standpoint for this very reason. Serena Beach design-wise is a completely different story though. I do think this game would benefit further from a Mario Galaxy level design perspective rather than a Mario 64, and I think Nintendo realized that, which may have led to the creation of Galaxy's structure, but we'll never know. I just don't like the idea of hopping into a big sandbox level if I'm not encouraged or hell, even allowed to explore it. Having linear level design to accommodate the linear structure of the game would help the flow of gameplay in my opinion, but it may just be a me thing. About halfway into collecting most of the normal shines, I began to know what to expect from these levels since nearly all of the objectives are the same, minus the few times the levels use their unique surroundings for a mission, but they did what they can in the time they have, which I guess leads into how tragic it is that the game was rushed to all hell and back. It is no secret that a lot of the most iconic GameCube games were rushed. It's not common knowledge or anything like that until someone really points it out to you, and then all of a sudden you can't look away from how many first-party GameCube games have you backtracked towards the end. Due to the time constraints, so many elements of the game either had to be watered down or cut entirely, which is partially what led to the jank the game carries with it. There's a reason you have to fight the same boss twice in nearly every level. There's a reason you have to collect red coins twice in nearly every level. There's a reason you have to fight Shadow Mario in every level, and it's solely because of the time constraints, which is very unfortunate in Sunshine's favor, because if given the proper time, I do think Mario Sunshine could have turned out so much better than it did. It's also the reason that completing this game is an absolute nightmare. Good God, I absolutely despise 100%ing this game. I didn't even want to do it because I knew it sucked, but the unfortunate part is, I was really sick while playing this game and my friend was pressuring me to do so. I didn't want to, but he was going to call me very mean names if I didn't, so I had to lock in. It's just such a frustrating experience. I genuinely believe you could complete Mario 64 without a guide. Some of the stars would be nonsense, but I believe it to be possible. There is absolutely no way you can 100% this game unless you have a guide on hand, or have done it before, and if you've done it before, why are you doing it again? The sole reason 100% completion was absolutely ruined for me was because of the blue coins. I'm sure you knew this was coming. I am saddened, frustrated, and very angry that this was Nintendo's best idea for padding out the game to get to 120 shines, because it's just really freaking stupid. Out of 120 shines in the game, 24 of them are from blue coins, which whittles down the actual shine count to around 96 real shines in the game. But it doesn't end there, because if we're counting real game missions, not including the Nothing Burger shines you find in Delfino Plaza, that lowers the countdown even further to 79. Out of every shine in the game, there were very few that gave me actual trouble. By far the most were the blue coins. Some I get. The paintings on the walls with time challenges, the ones that are out in the open, those make sense. Those I understand and don't really have a problem with. But how in the ever-loving hell am I supposed to know to shoot this random bird to get the coin? Hell, how was I supposed to know to shoot the moon until a coin showed up? It's really stupid coins like this that were practically made only to sell magazine guides at the time, because I do not understand how anyone in the history of ever just knew to do something like this or came across it by accident. Because not only that, but you have to be in a specific mission to get these coins. Every coin is obtained in a specific mission, so you can't just hop in wherever and expect to get the coins. You have to be in very specific areas and missions to get these coins, and it's honest to God the dumbest design choice imaginable. It also doesn't help that there are 240 of them in the entire game, 30 in each level. There are just some coins in general that are impossible to find without a guide. I genuinely would have never looked to find them in specific missions and areas, not only because of their nonsensical location, but also because you are not encouraged one bit to explore these levels to their fullest. Sometimes, the coins have you exploring parts of the level you're not expected to even be in for the specific mission, and it just has me scratching my little tiny gamer brain looking for some kind of answer that makes any sense as to why anyone thought this was a good idea. It's not only pure padding, but it's simply not fun. I spent over 2 hours with a guide open just looking for these things, and if you're forcing me to open a guide for any hopes of figuring out where to go or what to do, then you've done something wrong. And it's not like there's a complicated solution to this either. It's pretty simple to at least make the hunt for these coins somewhat enjoyable. Have a proper coin counter in the level. When you load in to select a shine, have a meter or something that shows how many blue coins you can collect in that level and how many you're missing in that specific mission. It would be a good idea to also throw in hints. Maybe you can spend some gold coins at the guy's shop to get some hints on some coins that, it's just simple stuff like that so you're not aimlessly walking around. I didn't want a guide to beat this game. I don't want my hand held, but at the same time, it's literally impossible to know what to do with these things or how to get them unless you have the craziest game sense to ever exist. And the lily pad mission. Look, if you know, and you definitely feel my pain. I spent way too long trying to do this mission the right way, so I eventually settled on the exploit where you can go underwater. If I ever have to beat this mission again, first of all, pray for me, but I am never going to do this mission the right way, considering that you only have one chance to do it, and the way to get there is so unorthodox and full of nonsense that it looks like some kind of exploit to get Yoshi over the island. I also wanted to share this clip of me getting completely screwed over by the game too. Yoshi and Mario were so weightless they got pushed by nothing, which forced me to spend another 10 minutes waiting and making 2 seemingly easy jumps just to fail them because Yoshi cannot platform to save his life. I feel like Mario Sunshine would not be that bad of a game to beat if a few things were changed. Cut down the blue coins by a lot, half at least. There's no reason to have that many in so many locations that you just can't predict. Have them in actually fun locations or, give hints as to where they're at. You know what? Scrap it. This is useless to talk about. Mario Sunshine is the game that it is, and there's nothing I can really do about it. By the time I was finished with the game, by the time I collected every last blue coin, just kind of felt like nothing. Like I was happy to be done with it, and that was it. I turned in my coins, I got the shines, and I turned the game off because I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. The gimmicks, the bosses, the controls, the blue coins, it all weighed down on me, but at the end of the day, I beat this game in full, and I will have the eternal bragging rights for it. But I can't really lie. This game kind of grew on me as I put it down. Before all the nonsense that was the final stretch of beating this game, the game grew on me quite a bit. I was having fun for a lot of my runtime. This game has its moments. It really does, and I gotta give credit where it's due. But I will say, it's much easier to talk bad about this game and criticize it than to praise it because for every step forward, there are 2 more steps back that I gotta take because of the nonsense this game threw at me. But I kind of liked it. I hate Serena Beach and the design of that course with all of my soul, but honestly, I would play Mario Sunshine again. When would I do that? I don't know, but I definitely see myself playing this game again and beating it because I think if you're going for just beating the game instead of completing it, I genuinely think you're gonna have a much better time. Just going through the shines like normal and giggling at the goofy story is enough for some people, and honestly, it's enough for me. I think Mario games, the 3D ones in particular, are best experienced in their entirety, although some don't really make that list, and I think Sunshine is the worst offender at this. If I were to give this game a rating, I genuinely believe that it's at a minimum a 7 out of 10 game when you're experiencing it like a casual gamer and just going for what a normal person does in beating the game. But somehow, the game gets so much worse when you're trying to experience it in full, and it makes me sad. I am so glad that gimmick levels like the watermelon stage and the lily pad stage are completely optional because with stupid gimmicks like that thrown in there, the game probably gets bumped down to a 5 or even a 4. It ruins the game that much for me. The game just gets destroyed by 1,000 paper cuts, but those cuts hardly rear their ugly head if you're playing this game for shits and gigs. And if you do like the blue coins and the overall 100% completion process, let me know in the comments below so I can pray for your sanity. Again, if you were to ask me if I would ever play Mario Sunshine again, I would say yeah. I think the levels on their own are fun enough to warrant a playthrough, as repetitive as they can get, but I don't think I'll ever complete this game again. It's just too much nonsense for me to handle. Besides, I've got more and frankly better games to move on to anyways.